second.
Yeah.
Yep, you're good.
All right. Good. Hey, Cecile, do you want to put yourself on mute and then just unmute when you want to? Okay. All right. Excellent.
But hey, Jeff, I don't need to vote, or I can't vote, right?
Correct. You
Okay,
can't
great.
vote.
Okay, yeah, I'll put myself on mute. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the July 9th meeting of the Granville School District Board of Education. If you would please join me by rising for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mrs. Driolo, if you please call roll.
Dr. Furman is absent today. Mr. Miller?
Here.
Ms. Deeds?
Here.
Mr. Wolf?
Here.
And Ms. Shaw is joining us via phone, but will not be voting today.
Okay. Very good. First item of business is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second. And just a recognition that there is, in the approval is the approval of the addendum as well.
Right, so it's approval as modified with the addendum. Nice and short today, so it should go quickly.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Yep, you're ready. June financial report.
All right, so we have the cash balance comparison. So we're in June, and so this is also going to be a comparison of the end of the fiscal year compared to the forecast. So looking at June ending cash balance, we're about 4.5 million more than we were last year, which again is largely due to the phasing of the income tax. Looking at revenue for just the month of June compared to last year. State revenue was up, and that again is timing. The cuts for state funding were made largely in June last year, whereas this year were spread out over all of the months. And then under all other revenue, we had the return of advance for the athletic complex donations that were pledged over multiple years. So that donation, as those came in throughout the year, went into the project fund, and then we returned those to the general fund. That was approved last month at the meeting, so that shows up on the June financial statement. Year-to-date revenue, local tax revenue, again, up because of the income tax. State is up slightly compared to last year because there was a portion of the cuts that were made last year that were restored this year. And then all other revenue, we're again seeing that return of advance from the athletic complex project show up. Then on the expenditure side, just for the month of June compared to last year, salary and benefits and purchase service, pretty close to where we were last year. All other expenses, that is including the year-end advances that were approved at last month's board meeting, and that was larger than last year due to the ESSER funds and having to cover the advance for those funds as well. Then year-to-date expenses, salary and benefits up due to that double up of the insurance payment that we had last July due to the software conversion. Purchase service down just slightly, and some of that is due to account code changes that we made. And then all their expenses down due to not having that transfer for the athletic complex project in there. So when we adjust for those two large issues, the athletic complex and then the insurance, expenditures in total were up $68,000 over prior year. So very close to where we ended the year last year. Then comparing to the forecast, just a couple items here on the revenue side to draw your attention to. We just had a couple account code changes. That's why you're seeing these items here be off from where they were forecasted. We just made some adjustments to where we're receiving. The advances in, again, were a little bit higher than what we had anticipated back in May. Some of those donations were higher than what we anticipated. Some people paid off sooner, so That's higher than what we had forecasted. And then all their financing sources is just an adjustment from the ESC for reconciling to what our actual expenses were last year. So that shows up as a reduction of prior year expenditure, which is actually revenue. So that's the 93 under that final row there. Then comparing expenses to the forecast, we were pretty close on the salary line item there. Benefits, we were off slightly. We had an adjustment on our June bill for some charges that were incorrect in prior months, so they trued that up this month. And then the other item, again, is the advanced outline item. So that was larger than what we had forecasted, but that does not impact total cash. So it'll reduce our ending cash for this current fiscal year, but then in July, and that'll be on the agenda later on, we'll return those advances. So in total, the cash is going to be the same. Then moving on to COVID-related expenses, we now have the ESSER 3 budget included in here, so some changes to what our use of those funds look like. We now have some additional detail here on this page for how we're planning to spend those funds. So cleaning supplies, again, much smaller than what we had last year. So we do have some supplies still on hand. We're still going to need the storage units for furniture that's been moved out of classrooms. There's also a 20% required set aside for learning loss interventions. So we have $104,000 allocated there for credit recovery in summer school. And then largely the remainder will be spent on facilities improvements and furniture. So flooring projects, HVAC, those kinds of things for the remainder there. And again, just a reminder that this $500,000 is just the initial allocation. We're anticipating another $261,000 will come later on once the state finalizes their appropriation.
You mentioned some HVAC things. Are those projects that will be implemented this summer specifically out of these funds?
Yes, I think largely they are beginning to work on those.
Yeah.
Okay. I think some of it is later on, like I think maybe the flooring may not all be happening this summer, but a lot of it is able to happen. Yep.
Is that middle school we can do HVAC
Yes,
things?
or is that just kids across the board?
Yeah, there's something happening at each building. And this is to supplement what's other projects that are going on that are going to come out of our permanent improvement fund.
Right.
So this is really just taking the pressure off of that because we're continuously having to even still put some prioritize those projects because there's still not enough funding for everything that we want to do from our capital plan. So this is really going to help get some of those projects done that are high need.
Is there some offset from the permanent improvement fund, and there's some offset from the general fund? It's a little tricky to kind of track like where we bring things into and go out of, but in
Yeah.
general, it's helping us out across the board.
Yes, yep. Then we have our cash reconciliation, and then state funding update. So last meeting, we were still kind of waiting to hear how things were gonna shake out at the state level. So we are thrilled to say that the Fair School Funding Plan has been implemented in House Bill 110. So while it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get a ton more money, it is creating a stable funding mechanism that we can intelligently explain to people. There's been a lot of work, obviously Mike Sobel was instrumental in that, but it was a funding formula based on actual costs. And it was developed with local treasurers and superintendents looking at each component of it. So that's huge. And then the local share is not overly reliant on local taxes. So it's a 60-40 split between property values and household income. So that's an improvement over how the state share was calculated previously. It's also going to look at current enrollment. So we've been just flat funded from where we were previously. So we're actually going to be funded based on the students that we currently have. Which again isn't huge for us because our enrollment is fairly stable, but for districts that are growing, that will help them. And then a couple of items that are going to just kind of, again, make the forecast and our financial statements look a little wonky, so I want to explain. The student wellness and success funds that were added in the last biennium, those were put into a designated fund. So they didn't show up on the forecast, they didn't show up on our monthly report, but going into the next biennium, those funds will be incorporated into the funding formula, so they will go into the general fund. So you'll see that revenue then show up on the forecast, we'll talk about it on there, and then we'll also have the expenditures in the forecast as well. So again, it won't be a net cash issue on the forecast, because we'll have the offsetting revenue and expense, but it will be an increase in revenue and an increase in expense.
So it looked like our per pupil expenditures will have gone up because
Right.
of that, which we received the corresponding revenue for anyway.
Right, yep. And then, in the opposite direction, we are only going to be receiving funding for those students who we educate. So community schools, open enrollment, scholarships, auxiliary, all those funds are going to go directly to those schools. So we will not be receiving funding for those students, but we also won't be receiving the offsetting deduction and expense for those items. Those items are excluded
Right.
from our per pupil expenditure, so it won't impact that, but it will impact, when we look at it, at revenue per pupil and that kind of thing. But that is significant as well, especially the auxiliary schools for us, because we do get a small admin fee for administering those funds, but not having to be the administrator for those funds will save us a lot of time. So again, overall, not a huge impact dollars-wise in total for us, for Granville schools, but this is a huge win for public education and for the future. Unfortunately, any reference to funding beyond the current biennium was removed from the final bill, so it still kind of leaves it up to the next legislature to determine what's going to happen, but it does make it hard to kind of scrap the whole plan now that that's in place. So overall, very positive news.
Yeah, fantastic. What's the overall state budget impact? Does this indeed require significant additional state funding for public education? Do you know what that big number was?
So,
I don't know the big number
There was
offhand,
some
but I
discussion about it,
Yeah.
that was one of the stopping points.
I don't know
if-
the net because of the success and wellness dollars fitting into
Okay.
that, so I'm not sure of the net. I know it's a net positive statewide, and I just don't know the magnitude.
The big push was saying that it was affordable and that there would be no new taxes to support it. So I don't know if that means that they're having to pull funds from elsewhere to fund this, but,
It was based on some state level forecasting as well.
Right,
so forth, so,
right.
Yeah. We'll see where that goes.
yep,
Well, that's just great, that lot we can count on, right, or something we can at least plug into, is just fantastic, all the work that's happening, is outstanding. It's just a little tricky also, because, when you're trying to compare to prior years, but these things seem like they're relatively small. These are in a couple of % magnitude of our overall revenue and expenditure, so it's not gonna really throw out too much. Or,
it will definitely, if you're looking at like a bar graph, it'll look funky. It'll dip a little bit, and we'll have to explain that. But I think honestly, we can do something like I do here,
and you were looking for to have this one done.
to have another year. So this, once we get to next year, we'll have a good comparison year over year, hopefully going forward. But that's a huge switch. The funding directly, the community open enrollment scholarships, that's huge for the state. So hopefully that, even if the formula completely changes 2 years from now,
Right.
hopefully that piece will continue, and that's really what's going to give us a good baseline to compare year over year, because that's going to be the big change in the forecast.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice to have sort of consistent metrics that we can look back over time and forecast over time and things like that, so we can show the community that
Yeah.
this responsibility, nothing massive has changed. It's hard when we have projects and we have other things that get thrown in there.
Yeah,
so.
that you're constantly having to adjust for. And that's the problem too, is like, we can adjust for it internally, but that's
Right.
still not,
What people will.
what the community might see from what's publicly available on the cover report and that kind of thing. So it is challenging, but we'll do our best to communicate that, and adjust for those one-time wonky differences year to year.
Okay. Good. I'm so proud of Mike Sobel, and I'm so glad that Nick Granville was able to kind of give him the latitude that he needed to be able to work on that at the state level. And so appreciative of all those that have been supportive of this, so great. Finally.
Yes, absolutely.
What was that?
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you. We now come to the time in our agenda for public comments. We don't have any public members here personally, but want to make sure that everyone that's watching this afterwards or online right now has the invitation to come here to any of our board meetings in the future. So we'll skip through public comments and get directly to the action agenda.
Okay, we have 2 action agenda items. The first is the approval to add Juneteenth as a new federal holiday for all 12-month employees.
Second.
So I believe President Biden approved this on the 18th, right? The day before the 19th. So we didn't necessarily have the opportunity to get ahead of this, so we're responding afterwards.
Yeah, we just need to track the federal
And-
policy there and so
Yeah.
forth.
And it's just,
It's not very many people, right?
yeah, it's administrative, exempt employees, and mechanics are the 12-month employees that we have.
Great. Take roll, please.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. The next item is the item to remove or rescind the board policy related to the face covering requirement, and I can give a little bit more information once there's a motion.
Second.
Okay, so we were required by law in the last year to have a face covering policy. That requirement has now expired, and there is no longer a requirement for a face covering policy. OSBA has recommended that we rescind this policy, and if there is the likelihood or the ability to adopt one in the future, that the board would have to make that decision down the road. But this is strictly tied to the requirement that was in place during the pandemic.
So we can also choose to implement guidelines, or we can choose to implement other kinds of ways to do it. This was just kind of the formal policy that was required that we're not going to have. And I expect this coming year, as we learn more and plans are written in pencil, we'll figure out what the best direction forward is.
And I know that Chad Brown is currently in conversations with ODH about next year. They have a meeting scheduled right now. So he was going to give me a call afterwards and let me know what he heard. So.
Tangentially related about a survey that was sent out to parents about potentially what their preferences would be for the coming year. Do you have any updates?
So we sent out K-3, just if parents would, want to be in an all-masked environment, to see what is the magnitude. We had roughly about 35 parents respond that they would like that across K-3. So obviously not enough to create one classroom per grade level there. We also wanted to ask at fourth and fifth grade as well, just to see what the numbers would result in. Once we have that information, then we'll put together, kind of a best case scenario to try and maximize the protection for vulnerable students. So I anticipate that we'll probably release something like that in early August.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Great. Yeah, it's constantly changing. Constantly worth revisiting, but thank you very much.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Excellent, thank you very much. Next is the approval of the routine consent agenda items, A through B12, including the consent agenda addendum.
B14.
B14, yes. Thank you.
So moved.
Second. All right, so we have our standard items. At this point, all the hiring from what we are aware of right now as far as vacancies is complete. So at this point, we are fully staffed. Obviously, we can have changes between now and the start of school, and we'll adjust to those, but at this point, we are fully staffed and ready for the 21-22 school year with these consent agenda items. And I
would like to recognize Nancy Rapp for her many years of service to Granville Schools. Nancy is a tremendous teacher, educator, and we wish her well in her retirement.
Feels great to see so many great names on the list of coaches and staff and things like that that we get to improve on a regular basis. It's just a lot of really quality people across this organization that gives me a lot of great confidence in the product there. Yeah. Yeah, great. Okay, enroll.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Thank you. So, finance.
Item 10.01, approval of the June 2021 financial report.
So moved.
Second.
Any additional questions or comments on the financial report?
No, looks great.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Okay, item 10.02, approval of the resolution for fiscal year 21 year-end return of advances to the general fund from the the reimbursement-based grant funds as listed.
So, second.
And again, these are just repayments of the opposite transaction that we approved last month, just so that these funds do not end in a negative cash balance at fiscal year end. Any
Great.
additional questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. Well, I promised a nice quick meeting.
You delivered.
If I can have a motion for adjournment,
So moved.
Second.
please.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.